Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of Princess State of Mind, where we talk about fiction, fairy tales, and the fairer sex. I'm really excited to have with me today Eric M. Blake. He's the film critic and chief cultural analyst for Western Free Press, and he's the writer of the ongoing Greatest Conservative Film series over there. And one of his greatest films on the list is a film that really taps into my area of expertise. So the film is Enchanted, and he is here today to talk to us all about this amazing film. So hi, Eric, how are you?
How you doing? How you doing, Lady Supreme Princess of the Multiverse, Faith Moore?
Oh, thank you for getting my titles correct. It's great to see you. So I'm just going to tell viewers that the reason that the audio and the video are a little patchy for Eric there is that he's on his phone and we're doing the very best that we can. So please forgive the discrepancy in the audio, but we'll do the best we can, and you guys do the best you can, and hopefully we'll have a good time. Anyway. Okay, so we're going to talk about Enchanted, which is a film that came out in 2007. So there are going to be some spoilers, which means that basically you should have watched the film by now. And if you haven't seen the film, you should go see it. We're not going to ruin it for you, but we are going to maybe spoil it a little bit. So that's the deal. But it's a really fascinating film, and it has a lot to say about my favorite subject, Disney princesses. So, all right, let's just get started. I'm always talking about how fairy tales are really allegories, and they sort of symbolically represent universal truths, and I'm always really frustrated with feminists for taking them so literally. But this is actually a film about a cartoon fairy tale princess who becomes literal. She enters the real world and interacts with real people, and that's why I find this movie so fascinating. So in your article, Eric, on Western Free Press, which everyone should check out, and it's there's a link in the description of this video, so everyone should read it. You say that this film holds the Disney princess tropes under a microscope and tests them and reconstructs them. So what does that mean? What's going on in this movie?
Well, basically, this is such an important film in the Disney canon, especially for the Disney princess trope, because I always found it very interesting that this film came out before Disney got it into their heads that they needed to deconstruct it and kind of reinvent the Disney princess mythos and so on. But it's almost as if there was a time when Disney was under the leadership of wiser heads, anticipated all the criticism and all of the attacks that these pseudo-feminists, I call them that mainly to trigger them, these pseudo-feminists, like the attacks that they levy against the Disney princess mindset, basically saying that she's outdated, that she speaks to like this like old mindset that needs to be discarded, needs to be outdated. But what Enchanted is, and this is one of the things that I love this film, and I will defend it to my dying day. It's because what Enchanted is more than anything else, it is Disney making a firm, unblinking, and unyielding declaration that yes, the Disney princess is relevant as we remember her. She is relevant, she is important, and she is beneficial to our society today. And we are going to prove it to you by first showing you the quintessential Disney princess in her element, this animated prologue, show her in the standard run-of-the-mill kind of story, like crunched down into a little short, and then we are going to pluck her out of that and throw her into our world. And when we do that, we are going to show her pick herself up, brush the dust off her dress, and function. She's going to function. She's going to look around her, like taking the fact that this is all different, and then accept that, and then influence the world around her for the better. Like there's this beautiful subplot where she affects this couple that's on the brink of divorce, and what does she do? She inspires them to reconcile.
Right.
And yeah, and it's so weird. There's this priceless moment near the very end where someone asks them, well, you can't let a chance encounter, change this. And says, well, what if it wasn't a chance encounter? What if it was destiny? What if it was meant to be? And it really showed, and it really, it is a dramatic portrayal of just how beneficial this archetype is to our society and how much we frankly need her as is. Like, don't try to reinvent her, don't try to change her. Yes, she adjusts to life in the world, but never once does she give up what makes her what she is.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you're saying, because it definitely sort of it came out in this pocket of time where, you've got like this movie and then Princess and the Frog and Tangled, which were kind of this return to the wonderful traditionalness of Disney and Disney princesses. And it seemed like they were kind of making this statement. And then they sort of went off the rails, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think it's so fascinating the way you're talking about it, because I agree. I mean, I rewatched it a couple days ago, and I completely agree that it is making a statement. But on the surface, it's kind of like this spoof, but it's both a spoof and an homage, which I think is really amazing about it. And so there's that piece. So I totally agree. It's definitely making a statement. And then, but the next part that I think is really interesting is that what happens chronologically in terms of Disney after this, as I'm sure you know, is a couple years later, they're making like Brave and Frozen, and suddenly they've done like a complete 180. And one thing that you kind of bring up in your article, and that I noticed too, is that this movie features a princess who is offered two romantic options. One is the traditional kind of fairy tale prince in Edward, and the other is a kind of regular guy in Robert. And another film that I can think of that has this same setup is, I'm sure you know, Frozen, right? Where Princess Anna has the traditional prince, Hans, and then the regular guy, Kristoff, and both of them end up with the regular guy, but for sort of different reasons and in different ways. And so I really feel like in Frozen, the movie is trying to tell us, the fairy tale prince isn't real. There's no such thing as that. In fact, he's this murdering psychopath. Choose the regular guy who talks to reindeer. Is that what Enchanted is telling us too?
Well, I'm very glad you brought this up, because this has been burning in me for a while. Like, I just had to get this off my chest. Just how much it was so interesting. I actually saw, or at least I saw bits and pieces of Frozen before I finally saw Enchanted. And I remember being very fascinated with Frozen. I didn't see the twist at the end where like Hans turns out to be evil at first. Of course, then I heard about it and I saw it, but I found it very interesting how Frozen struck me as, oh, this is the Disney princess story deconstructing itself. That's very interesting. And then I saw Enchanted. Frozen came out in 2013. Enchanted came out in 2007. And when I see Enchanted, I was thinking, wait a minute. Disney didn't need to deconstruct the Disney princess story. They already did it in Enchanted. And watching the two films together, frankly, Enchanted did it better in so many ways. It did it, and it's almost as if they didn't. If Disney was apparently promoting Frozen as the Disney princess story, like looking at itself, deconstructing itself, it's like, well, you already did that. You didn't need to make Frozen then. Why make Frozen? There's a reason for it. It is a very important reason, because, and just as you were bringing up, what is the difference between the two of them? And that's how it wraps up, how this conflict is reconciled. In Enchanted, while Prince Edward, while he turns out to be not her true love, he's still a good guy, and he ends up with like a girl in the end, another gal in the end.
Mm-hmm.
But in Frozen, lo and behold, the prince is the bad guy. And leaving aside the fact that this was a twist, it feels like a twist that they just yanked out of thin air and just threw in, because there is no setup at all. And look, I've practiced as a screenwriter. That's one of my aspirations. It's like I've learned these like story structure, and if you're going to put a twist in a story, you better have proper setup. Now, not the kind of setup that spoils that there's a twist coming, but the kind of thing where if you were to look back at the story again, if you were to watch the movie again, you can then, with clarity, see the clues.
Yeah, the term
Like,
I've heard for that is post-dictable, which I really like that you didn't know before, but once you do it, you can look back and see that it was obvious.
now, are there any clues in Frozen that Hans was the bad guy? No.
Nope.
And he was very much acting like a good guy through and through. And so it's something that he just threw in there for no reason, or was it for no reason? But
Right.
again, the reconciliation, the very idea that Hans turns out to be the bad guy, this good guy with no clues, no setup whatsoever, turns out to be the bad guy. It really reminded me of the great conservative film critic Michael Medved. He wrote this book, Hollywood versus America, and he was like going into these things. And one of the things he went into was there was this trope in the late 80s and early 90s of the women's thriller where it would always have this kind of thing. It would begin with a very romantic kind of thing where she meets Mr. Right, they fall in love, they marry, and then he turns out to be evil. He's a
Right.
psychopath. She has to get away from him. And that's what that twist with no setup in Frozen really reminded me of. And I remember reading actually, someone pointed out, you do know what this does to little girls, right, who grow up with Frozen? From now on, they are going to look at the classic Disney princess stories and they're going to have this doubt in the back of their minds as to whether Prince Charming or Prince Philip or Prince Eric or whoever is actually secretly a bad guy and they're waiting for that twist and it doesn't happen. Well,
Right.
it instills paranoia. It has the risk of instilling paranoia, a kind of militant feminist paranoia, where like again, which came out at the same time, late 80s, early 90s, woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, like, and there's angry like view heterosexual relationships with suspicion because men are evil, that sort of thing. And there's the danger of that. Enchanted doesn't have any of that. Enchanted, no, the reconciliation is true love's kiss, the most powerful thing in the world. Whereas in Frozen, as you pointed out, they replace that with the feminist ideal of sisterhood, as sisterhood as being above the love of a man and woman.
Right. So I completely agree with that, but I do have one question, one place I want to sort of push back, which is that you're right that in Enchanted, Edward, the Prince Charming guy, is a nice guy, but he's an idiot. I mean, he really is kind of a buffoon, and like that's funny, and it's played for laughs, and it's great. And I agree that he's well-meaning and he's nice, and he should end up with a girl at the end, and he does. But it does kind of seem like they are. I mean, Giselle, right, the princess, is this positive, wonderful force for good, even in the real world and in the fairy tale world. She is this really positive, amazing character, and the movie is saying so much about the importance of princesses and this kind of princess in particular. But the prince is not so great, and the guy that she ends up with is really great and is obviously the right person for her. But what is the movie saying about the trope of Prince Charming?
Well, oddly enough, while it does poke fun at him, I almost feel like the reason it pokes fun at him is there's this sense that he is out of his element. Like he's a pretty awesome. We see he's an awesome, deadly swinging dude, to quote Bill Whittle in the prologue, and he's pretty
Mhm.
fun, very charming in the prologue. He's in the real world, and he doesn't adjust to it nearly as much as she does. But as time goes on, like he starts out as a goofball and like pratfall, prone to pratfalls and all that, but there is still he's not totally a buffoon. He's not totally an idiot. There's moments of you see there's this genuine concern after he and Giselle reunite, as he's like wondering as why is she so reluctant to leave and go back to Andalusia? Like there's this great moment where they're like walk across the bridge and they're talking, and she says, "I want to go this, I want to do this, I want to go to the ball," and he takes her aside, and Giselle, then we can go back to Andalusia. And
Right.
there's just a genuine concern on his face. So it's not that he is totally a buffoon. It's just that he is out of his league. And he doesn't have the magical qualities, if you will, that the Disney prince had. And he never has, aside from talking to his horse, on occasion. But in this case, yes, he talks he can kind of sort of talk to Pip, but in his defense, no one really can except for Giselle. But
Right.
he does in the climax, though. It's very important. In the climax, he understands Pip perfectly, and of course, I
Right.
think that be pretty awesome. And of course, when he confronts Narissa, like at the climax, he's back in his element and he's awesome again. So I almost feel like, yes, it does take laughs at his expense, but more because he's a fish out of water. And while Giselle is a fish out of water, she still has that magical quality that's very symbolic of the value of the Disney princess, that she is relevant. The movie is about her being relevant to our society today. You
Right.
have
Yeah. And I actually, sorry, I take your point because I think what was so interesting to me about the movie is at the very beginning, as you say, you've got this almost sort of short, like this cartoon version of the story, and then she kind of gets thrown into the real world, and it's played for laughs that she's kind of like, I'm waiting for my prince, and then like she falls into his arms, and he says like we'll be married in the morning. It's like they don't know each other at all. But the thing is, like, that actually is a fairy tale trope, and it would work in a fairy tale for a variety of reasons. That everyone could find out if they read my book. Okay, but anyway, the so like it kind of works. Oh, you read my book too.
I have it too.
Everyone should have it. Anyway, so I think I take your point in that sense that like he works in the cartoon, but he doesn't work so well in the real world. So then I think it's really interesting then to sort of look at this movie as the case for Disney princesses, especially if Frozen, for example, and even like Brave and some of these other movies are the case against them. And I think this movie kind of explains like why we need them, what's so important about them, as you've been talking about. So in the movie, Narissa, who's like the Wicked Witch character, she calls our world a place where there are no happily ever afters. And so
Oh,
when Giselle comes to our world, this is my question: what does she bring to our world and to Robert that was lacking?
I think she brings hope. She brings
Mhm.
a positive, a sense of joy in the world, a sense of enjoying life and finding happy endings if you think there aren't any. Like, as I said, she helps a divorcing couple to reconcile just by commenting on them in a very romantic sort of way. And it is such a beautiful moment, by the way, that when Robert takes her side and explains to her what divorce is, she breaks down in tears. And I felt it's one of my favorite moments from. It is such a powerful moment, and it's also a searing indictment about how our culture has trivialized divorce and kind of shrugged it off as just a fact of life. And no, it's a very serious thing. It's a very dark thing. And here we have Giselle breaking down in tears and reminding us of how bad it is. And it's a way of like getting these couple to snap out of it. And of course, her general positive influence in the world, like we see this in that classic Central Park dance and singing dance number. How that's how you know.
Yeah,
Where
that was great.
she's inspiring everyone around her to like join her in song and dance, and it's a symbolic gesture of like inspiring joy and love and hope in the world. And by the way, this does in a way like help. If we could go back a little bit to the contrast between Enchanted and Frozen, this is another thing
Mhm.
that I've been wondering about, and it's actually fairly recent. What are the two best known songs in Enchanted? Happy Working Song, where she's and That's How You Know. Now, I've Been Dreaming of True Love's Kiss is a masterpiece, but that's another thing. But Happy Working Song, it's clearly based off of Whistle While You Work from Snow White, but it's like
Right.
it's her celebrating the joy of this working, houseworking, a great work ethic, and is exactly what feminists are complaining about. Why do the Disney princess always clean and all that? No, she's taking joy in it. Suck it up, Buttercup. But the other one, but in the other round, of course, That's How You Know. There's something very interesting about the setup to That's How You Know. Robert and Giselle have just been in a conversation where Robert kind of challenges her on the whole idea of love at first sight and so True Love's Kiss. And at that point, it seems like he's the one in the right, and that she's the one who's being incredibly naive. But what happens right before the song? She turns the question around on him and says, "Well, what about you and Nancy? You know, you and she will live happily ever after." The conversation has turned into the idea of happily ever after. And he's like, "Well, Giselle, like most relationships are considered a success if they last at all, let alone happily. Because, well, you know you and she'll live happily ever after. Well, I guess. Well, doesn't she know? Well, I'm sure she does. How? And then she launches into the song. And if you listen to the song, it is Giselle laying out a beautifully vivid picture as to exactly what true love looks like. And she actually says in the song, it's not enough to find the one you love, to take the one you love for granted. You've got to tell her, or she'll be inclined to say, how do I know you love me? How do I know it's true? And she goes into these things. None of them are big things, like he would take a bullet for you. But there are always these little tiny little things, like this one line always gets to me because it's almost a foreshadowed inside joke for Amy Adams. He will wear your favorite colors just so he can match your eyes. And that always reminds me of Man of Steel, Superman. What's the color of Superman's suit? Blue. What's the color of Amy Adams' eyes? Is Lois Lane blue? So, but regardless, these little things, like he'll leave a little note to tell you you are on his mind. These quick little things. And the point of the song is happily ever after is not something you take for granted. It's something that you have to work at and you have to maintain and always remind each other of that. And it really suddenly Robert becomes the naive one, kind of shrugging off the idea of being a romantic and working a relationship. And she's the one laying out, the Disney princess laying out that love is something you work at, love is something you maintain. Now, compare those two beautifully wise songs that we frankly wish Disney would give us more of. What are the two most well-known songs of Frozen? Do You Want to Build a Snowman, which is a very depressing, dark kind of song about the relationship of two sisters falling apart and dying.
Right, and the parents die in that song too.
The parents died, and then Let It Go. But I believe you can say exactly what's so wrong about Let It Go far better from me because you've already done it. It's
Read
so
the book.
And at this point, and people say, but Eric, but Faith, I mean, Ilsa learns how wrong she is. Yeah. So would you mind explaining to me why that's the song that little girls sing all the time and remember the most, and they sing it, let it go, no right, no wrong, I'm free. It's the most popular song, and Disney plays it up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like what's really interesting to me about what you're saying is that, you know, when the Disney princess shows up in the real world, because I'm always talking about how a Disney princess type person can exist in the real world, but she's not going to look the same and act the same as she does in the cartoon. And I think, I mean, that's what makes this movie so interesting, is because initially Giselle does act that way because she is a cartoon, and then she kind of figures out how to live in the world. But what you're saying is she comes and sort of explains the way to get to happily ever after, which is the same in a cartoon, except symbolically represented as it is in real life. And the best part about it is that then when Robert's like, okay, fine, sure, and he sends his very sort of feminist, empowered woman girlfriend like the live doves and the flowers, she's like so happy, because it's like, yeah, this is what women want, even that kind of woman. So you're right, like she's bringing to our world this idea that we've largely lost. And so the sort of flip side of that is, one of the things I really love about the movie is that Robert is not the typical feminist teachable male. You know, he's a great dad. He's got this daughter. He's not like forgetting her, like to go pick her up. He's not like saying he's got to work, sorry, and like leaving her with the babysitter. He's like a really great guy, and he's really sweet, and he takes care of Giselle when Giselle shows up on his doorstep, and you know, he takes care of his daughter really, really well. And you know, he isn't that guy that you see in a lot of these movies where then the woman has to come and teach him how to be nice. So what does Robert give to Giselle? Because I think it's a two-way street.
Robert is her gateway to realizing that she can function perfectly in the real world. And it was worth noting, like, he shows her around. He's the one, he demonstrates to her like how to function, how to go around in the world. And he is her opportunity. she is the door of opportunity that she goes through, and like realizes like how magical this world can be. Like they balance each other out in that he provides her with a look at how the world is, the problems of the world, and frankly how much it needs what she has to bring. Like that beautiful scene in the pizza parlor where he basically breaks down and lets her know like the pain that's in his heart, because like he was married before and his wife left him, and she's like saying, well, that led him to reject this whole idea of love and happily and dreams coming true. And she like learn and she learns. And by the way, it's a great analogy for faith. By the way, like he acts like the stereotypical atheist. Well, I used to believe that stuff, but then I woke up. And she goes, "What made you wake up?" And she effectively kills with kindness. She shows her like with her compassion, she gets him to open up to her, and so on. Um, but mainly, she is she is and he is her gateway to dem to the world, to accepting the world. He's her bridge, effectively. And
I think that's right. I think that makes sense. And I think, it's kind of like why does she end up like we were talking about before, why does she end up with Robert and not with Edward? And it's kind of like, well, in the real world, this is Prince Charming. This is what Prince Charming looks like in the real world. He's kind, he's caring, he's a good dad, all of this stuff, but he isn't like riding around on a horse with a sword stabbing stuff. He's a real guy. And I think that's really interesting. And the other interesting piece is that so he initially has this girlfriend, Nancy, played by Adina Menzel, who ridiculously does not sing in the movie. But anyway, she is the sort of typical feminist, like empowered woman, and she like marches around in pantsuits and stuff, and she's kind of like, hey girl and stuff. But she also is not horrible. Like she's not the horrible girlfriend that needs to be ditched immediately. She's also really nice and really caring, and she really appreciates Robert as a father. She appreciates the things that he does. She appreciates their family. It looks like she's probably going to be a fairly good stepmother. But she is the one that ends up with Prince Charming in the end, and she sort of jumps back through the portal to Andalasia at the end and becomes a cartoon. So. Yeah. Is the movie saying something about these feminist women and what they actually want?
Well, it depends. Well, it depends, because it really depends on what kind of feminist they are. Is she one that hates men, or is she not? Is she a true feminist who honestly is looking for empowerment to be successful in life, or is she a bitter, angry, man-hating militant? Clearly, she's not from the very beginning. And I'm glad you brought up she ends up with Edward in the end. And this is something that I actually did not notice this until I was watching this, and I remember like contacting you about this. I said, "Oh, pay attention to this moment. Pay attention to this moment, because I just found this out."
Great.
In the ball where they introduce themselves to each other. And this, by the way, is a great illustration of how Edward is not fully just a goofball. He's not just comic relief. Where he launches into this romantic, poetic kind of statement about Giselle and Nancy. I almost said Ilsa. Nancy, because that's who she plays in Frozen. But Nancy is just impressed, and she's blown away. And she says, "It's like just the way you said it, just not a hint of irony." Which, by the way, is right. A statement about Enchanted itself. She like they present the Disney princess without a hint of irony, and just I think. It is really a demonstration of, I think that most of the honest feminists, the true ones, if you will, they do not hate men. They are looking, in fact, they hate what men have been forced to become. But they are looking for that, despite everything, they are still looking for that notion of classical manhood, classical masculinity, that sort of thing. The romantic hero, the knight in shining armor. Someday my prince will come. There's that thing. Like, and I would almost say, a great litmus test between whether you're a pseudo-feminist or whether you truly are looking out for the empowerment of women is, do you like Disney princesses or not?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, so we're running a little bit out of time, but there is one last thing that I want to talk about, because there is one part of this movie that really bugs me, and I want to get your take on that. And that is that at almost the very end of this film, there's this kind of like out of left field feminist moment where Narissa turns into a dragon and grabs Robert and carries him up to the top of a building. And suddenly Giselle is like throwing her princess heel on the floor, grabbing the sword, like climbing to the top of the building, throwing the sword to like magically have it hit, Robert's like cuff and capture him there. And Narissa even calls Robert the damsel in distress.
Yeah.
And I just felt like in this movie that is so obviously telling us how important this feminine princess character is to us in the world, in the real world. Why does she have to do that at the end? What's going on there?
I'll tell you why. Because, and I go into this in the article actually for those of you who want to check this out. But in a way, it's almost a send up of that whole what the feminists say that they want in the Disney princess thing. Well, why doesn't she save him for once? Well, she does, but not. But this is important. Before that, the entire reason that Narissa grabs Robert, she was going to grab Giselle first. Says, let's start off with a girl who started it all, shall we? And what does Robert do? He steps in front of her and says, in front of Giselle and says, over my dead body. And he goes, all right, I'm flexible. And this is important. Giselle doesn't save her. Doesn't say, no, sorry, not her. Giselle doesn't save Robert until after Robert saves her, just after she saves her. And of course, he saves her twice in that sequence. He saves her by being the man who gives her true love's kiss, by kissing her and like bringing her back from the poison apple. And then by stepping in front of her and saying, over my dead body. And he goes, it's all right, I'm flexible. It is the ultimate act of true love. He would take a bullet for her, that sort of thing. So it is the ultimate act of bravery. So that is the first thing. And also, you brought up yourself, who is it that's bringing up the whole idea of Robert being the damsel in distress? Narissa, who is the embodiment of everything we love to hate about these pseudo-feminists, stepping on men's toes, hating men, hating the whole idea of romance, literally hating the Disney princess. And she verbally makes it a point to try and emasculate the men around her, like calling Nathaniel worthless and so on. And then she picks up, oh, the brave little princess. I guess that makes you the damsel in distress, huh, handsome? So it's the bad guy who's trying to rub it in our faces. But keep in mind, this scenario would not have happened if he had not taken the proverbial bullet for her, like the ultimate act of bravery, giving himself for her.
Yeah, I actually totally take your point about the bad guy saying it, because I'm always complaining about this, that like people will take something that somebody says, like that the bad guy says. I complain about it in the Little Mermaid all the time, that feminists always say, like, Ariel gives up her voice for a man and then she has to use her body to get Eric. And it's like, no, that's what Ursula says. Ursula says use your body language. So I take your point about that one. I think that because Giselle has already saved Robert, is the thing. Like she already has saved him. She brought back his sense of hope and love and true love, which he had previously had, but his relationship with his first wife had kind of killed that for him, and she brought that back for him and she saved him. And so I think like throwing in this kind of like sword climbing a building thing, it kind of like takes that away for me. I don't know. Like, do you think they were sort of pandering there to people who were going to be upset, or do you think they're really trying to say something?
I think yes and no. They were showing it on the surface, but underneath, again, yes, she already saved him. He had just saved her twice. He saved her from true love's kiss, and then he saved her by over my dead body. So she saved him spiritually, and then she saves him physically. Now, it's worth noting, yes, she climbs up, but not without some struggle. And as it turns out, really, the one who saves the day and saves Robert isn't her, it's Pip, the chipmunk.
That's true.
She throws the sword, but it's worth noting that at the very beginning, it's Prince Edward who throws the sword in the prologue, saving her right there. So it's that she learned from Prince Edward. So you can say, oh, it's something she learned from a man. Well, suck it up, pseudo-feminist. But anyway, and as for that, like putting her shoe down, putting the slipper down. Well, I could say that there's payoff for it, where in the fact that it symbolically fits Nancy, and Edward says it's a perfect fit. And by the way, it is a way of delivering it's a way of, like, on the one hand pandering on the surface, but on the other hand, if you look underneath, which, as you've noticed, pseudo-feminists seem incapable of doing, look underneath the surface, and it is the two of them have saved each other twice. So it's a balancing act. The two of them would take a bullet for each other, the ultimate act of true love. They would risk their lives to save each other, and with Pip's help, I guess. And by the way, one big thing. You had on the good Dr. Beale in an earlier episode, and she brought up two things. And I remember watching the episode, and I was like, Enchanted. I got to talk about this with Enchanted. Well, one, she was talking about saving the prince. Well, we've talked about that. But the other thing is something she brought up about the whole idea that the princess story, the princess story approaches the idea of stepmothers, that stepmothers are, as a rule, the villain. Well, lo and behold, in Enchanted, Nerissa is the played straight, wicked stepmother. But I would like to point, if hopefully if Dr. Beale, the good Dr. Beale, ever sees this, hi Doc, if you ever see this, like, go to Enchanted, pay attention to the sequence where Giselle and Morgan, Robert's daughter, if they're hanging out, like they're having their girls' day out, I guess, they're shopping and all that, and they're talking about, like, is this what it's like going shopping with your mother? And Giselle brings up to Morgan, and just think, soon you're going to have a new mother, meaning Nancy, but then it turns out to be Giselle. And she goes, you mean stepmother? And Giselle says, it's not really true what they say. I've met some very wonderful stepmothers. And of course, it sets up the laugh line, like that's where Nerissa shows up in the real world. But at the very end, Robert and Giselle get together with happily ever after. What does that make Giselle for Morgan?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, because I think in the real world, and you're right, I mean, we did talk about this with Dr. Beale, and I sort of said this too, is that in the real world, there are wonderful stepmothers. But in a fairy tale world, there's a reason why the stepmothers are not so great. And so in the real world, a person like Giselle or even Nancy could be a great stepmother to someone like Morgan or to anyone. And I think, it's neat that they put that in there. So I totally agree. Okay, so we are kind of out of time here, so I think we're going to stop there, but this was super interesting, exciting. I hope that everyone watching will check out Eric's article, which again is in the description of this video, and he writes all about this. It's really interesting, and you should also watch the movie. You should watch it again. I watched it again, and I, with all of this in mind, and it's really interesting. So watch.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe, God willing, if you ever decide to do, oh boy, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, if you ever decide to do an expanded second edition of Saving Cinderella, perhaps with additional like future projects and all that, it would be, I would very much love to see a chapter on Enchanted, perhaps just before the Princess and the Frog chapter.
All right. Well, how about I blog about it this week?
Perhaps. I'd love that. Well,
okay, so I will do that. But also, so check out Eric's article. Check out Eric on Twitter. What your Twitter handle is @hardboiledfilms, right?
You can check me out on Twitter @hardboiledfilms. On Facebook, like Western Free Press has, like, it's a Facebook page on Facebook, and you can check me out. I don't have any new videos on it yet, but I'm working on it. On YouTube, Hardboiled Entertainment.
Great, perfect. So yeah, all of that. I didn't put the YouTube thing, but I can add that. But also their Twitter handle is under there. And of course, as always, the link to my book is on there too. So if you haven't bought it, you should buy it. And also please subscribe to this channel so that you can know what else we're doing. So Eric, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure to have you. And I will see you all later. Bye.
It's good to be here. Bye.